The fact of the existence of Atlantis is not precisely confirmed, as is the location. But over the years, the bright minds of scientists incredibly narrowed the range of searches for Atlantis, and also gouged thousands of myths associated with it. And instead of chilling stories about crystals, aliens, and Nibiru, we can talk about Atlantis with clear facts, which we will analyze in the next couple of minutes. Go! Do you know that in a good way the Mediterranean Sea should be called the Atlantic, and the title given to it should be taken away from the ocean by mistake? Do not switch, there will be a lot of such funny details. Well, first, let's summarize what Atlantis is in general. This is a hypothetical island state that existed many thousands of years ago and has achieved quite good power. Basically, knowledge about her comes to us from the ancient Greek philosopher Plato. In the Dialogue of Critias, he already described in great detail the geography, history and death of Atlantis. During the Renaissance, especially in our darkest days of conspiracy theory, Atlantis captured the minds and spawned a slew of theories. Disappeared Atlantis, according to him, somewhere in 9500 BC. Atlantis was inhabited by the huge titans led by Poseidon under the leadership of the king of Atlanta, who gave the name to the island. Plato went through the details in detail, stating that elephants lived in Atlantis. The army consisted of 10,000 chariots and 1,000 ships, and in the center of the island there was a huge temple. It is worth noting that in addition to Plato, other guys described Atlantis. Herodotus, Gelani's contemporary, for example, also mentions the descendants of Titan Atlanta, who long ago created a mighty marine civilization. Only now he correlates it with the Minoan civilization of Crete, which at one time managed to make war with Athens. Roughly speaking, the situation is such that, in general, the existence of Atlantis is true among the ancient Greek philosophers and historians. But the details are insanely different, and this is the main trap, knowing that any conspiracy videos about Atlantis can be turned off in the first second, because the ancient Greeks, an unreliable source of information. The best example, the Greco-Persian War, which, thanks to numerous records, has been thoroughly studied. Only here in Plato's allegory it looks differently. The Greeks, instead of scattered polis, united only in the face of a terrible threat, are shown by sages, with the bodies of Spartans and the mind of Einstein. Plato declares that having won, the Athenians gave freedom to all peoples, and did not take a dime from the defeated. In reality, of course, the Athenians transformed the victory over the Persians into the creation of their own empire. In general, you should not particularly trust the Greek historians, and everything that is said about Atlantis should be divided by 10. Starting from the 9000th age of the island, even with modern methods of studying such bearded times, it gives only fragmentary data. It is doubtful that anything so far came to Plato. The same scheme should be applied to the size, power and geography of Atlantis. By connecting modern knowledge of geography, history and geology, scientists have long ago reduced the myth of the disappeared island to two main theories. And both of them are united by one fact. There could be no Atlantis in the Atlantic Sea. It's funny, considering that the sea got its name from the supposedly sunken island. This is due to the banal absence of the checking fact, by the people who gave the name. After all, the same ancient Greeks, who described Atlantis and the war with it, very officially declared that they knew where the end of the world was. According to a legend that you probably know, Hercules traveled to the extreme point of the world, reaching the end of the Mediterranean Sea, and when he saw the mountains on the way, he did not soar and cut through, forming the modern Strait of Gibraltar and two rocks, one from Europe and the second from Africa. Since then they are called the Pillars of Hercules. Given the developed, but still ancient navigation, these pillars were considered by the Greeks and the whole world of Middle-earth to be the farthest point in the world. In general, the Phoenicians passed them, and along the shores of the Atlantic Ocean they even reached Britain. But for us now it is important that in the times described by Plato this point was considered the end, and given that Athens allegedly fought with the Atlanteans, the facts do not add up, because there could not be a suitable fleet in them. How did it happen that Plato still described the war with the inhabitants of Atlantis living behind the Pillars of Hercules? As usual, there is no magic or mysticism in this story. The fact is that these very pillars in the ancient world were counted at least 7. Of course, the Strait of Gibraltar was the main one, but sailors called almost all the Straits of Hercules. For example, the Bosphorus, the Kerch Strait, the Dardanelles, and even the mouth of the Nile were also framed by the Pillars of Hercules. It was convenient for the sailors. The pillars served as a semblance of lighthouses and a landmark, and the fact that there were several such pillars, lovers of conspiracy theories forget. And even if you believe Plato, knowing this fact, it turns out that Atlantis should still be in the Mediterranean Sea. After studying these records further, we learn that the disappearance of Atlantis allegedly made it difficult for sailors to overcome the Pillars of Hercules and go to the open sea. Destroyed by an earthquake, the island sank under the water, forming a heap of impenetrable silt. Do you know where Plato got this information from? From the Egyptian priest Themi, who lived 200 years before him, which described the problems with navigation in the area of the Pillars of Hercules. Only now Themi probably meant the Egyptian closest to him. They were located at the mouth of the Nile, where there was a city named after Hercules, and Plato, not really bothering, transferred his words to other pillars, Gibraltar. This is where the legs of the name of the Atlantic Ocean grow. The name was given to him by the Greeks. True, they talked about the sea washing Atlantis, then about the very Atlanta, which ruled over it and kept the firmament, but his followers, not bothering too much over the details, after opening the ocean, took the name. Only here the original source in the person of Timaeus, in view of his death, they forgot to ask, and originally the Atlantic Sea, as well as the mysterious homeland of the Atlanteans, was a space in the Mediterranean Sea. At least a simple analysis of the facts suggests just that. With the civilization in the Mediterranean Sea, the Greeks really could fight. Moreover, according to the same words of Plato, the victory over the Atlanteans allowed the Greeks to free even the Egyptians. It would be strange if they were enslaved by guys living in the Atlantic Ocean thousands of kilometers away. Isn't that so? So this detail directly hints that if the mythical Atlantis existed, then its place in the Mediterranean Sea. From there it is not far from Egypt and you can fight with the Greeks. And here we come to the three most logical theories. The first theory, no Atlantis existed and Plato simply composed another cautionary tale about gods and people, whom the Greeks, as we know, invented a trillion. The second theory, Plato simply took a documented event from the distant past and embellished it. The version looks the most logical. After all, this is completely in the style of the Greeks, whose real-life kings in the annals turn into the sons of gods with superpowers. According to this logic, it can be assumed that in the Mediterranean Sea on the island there was a country that was at war with Athens and Egypt. This is very readily believed, because in those days there were a million such mini-states, for example, the Minoan civilization of the inhabitants of Crete. There were very, very many policies in the Aegean Sea. Somewhere in the 16th century BC, the volcano Santorini on the island of Thera raged, which caused a global cataclysm in the Mediterranean Sea. He shattered the power of the Minoan civilization and, accordingly, destroyed the people who lived on the island, because just like in legends, he went underwater. Right now, the Greeks are doing a lot of excavations on the island and are indeed finding evidence of an advanced civilization on the island of Thera, and its inhabitants are attributed to the Minoan civilization, which is quite possibly in a certain period of history really fought with Athens, on which Plato built his instructive story. Almost everything fits into the version. Definitely, the consequences of the cataclysm and the tsunami have reached Egypt. What old Themi wrote about later in his notes. It is important to understand that for both guys, even the eruption of the Santorini volcano happened 1,000 years ago, that is, incredibly long ago, so it is logical to exaggerate it to 9,000 years. This is perhaps the most logical and working version, considering everything we talked about above. But for the supporters of secrets and mysteries, there is still hope, not at the North Pole, though Atlantis isn't there. But in the Mediterranean Sea it is very even, and using our simple analysis and fresh data from scientists, you can even draw a very limited area. If such a large island existed, at least hypothetically, you need to look for it between Egypt, Cyprus, and Crete. At one time, theoretically, there could be land there, for historically the African tectonic plate departed from the Eurasian one. Geologists believe there were islands in the sea north of Africa at some time. But the rising water level drowned them. Right now, there is a depression up to 4 kilometers deep. And the moment of its formation really looked like a disaster. The slabs simply dispersed, plunging a large number of territories into the water. And there is no mysticism in the fact that Atlantis, if such existed there until now, has not been found. We are talking about a large, and more importantly, deep territory, which is long and difficult to explore. Crete and Cyprus could indeed have been part of an archipelago that was submerged, and people there almost certainly lived, and we settled in due time wherever possible. The trouble is that you need to involve science to solve such problems. And you shouldn't attract crazy upstarts like Edward Casey, who dashed off a whole book about the magic crystals of Atlantis, which is still referred to by TV channels and serious sources. If anything, the same Casey predicted that in 1960 Atlantis will rise again, Hitler will win the Second World War, and a bunch of other garbage. The lovers of his works close their eyes to this, but if you open them to common sense, facts and science, everything becomes much easier, but no less interesting. If you liked the video, we will be glad to your like. Until next time, friends.